coming from a common source. It's got to be obeyed. Like some sort of magnet is all about Neil Motor. Let's keep an eye out for it, though.
This is a 16-part series showing 16 different legendary builds on all 3 classes, all 5 subclasses. I'll be using 16 different exotic armors, 16 different exotic weapons, and 32 different legendary weapons, along with 0 artifact mods. And I will be showing these builds applied over 16 different solo flawless legendary missions. The playlist will be on my channel, dim links will be in the description, and if you enjoy the content, please let me know by leaving a like, a comment, subbing, all that good stuff. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy and let's get into it. Alright, welcome back to my legendary build series. I'm on Striker today doing a solo flawless run at the legendary Lightfall campaign mission Breakneck, which is a fairly claustrophobic mission. With a lot of rooms with different Vex, Wyverns, and Hydras, and then finishing off with the last small room with a bunch of Cabal and the 2 Tormentors. May ring a bell. That room can get pretty crazy, so I am glad that the further I get along with these legendary campaign missions, the difficulty is being ramped up slightly, so it makes it a little bit more of a challenge, which is more fun for me to play, and it's more satisfying for me to get a flawless run. and I get to use the builds that I really think will shine in those missions. So anyway, what's so great about Striker? Well, for one, Arc Titan probably offers the highest damage out of all the Titan subclasses. Not just that, but it is in my experience, Striker is the most fun. Actually, it's probably the most fun class to play on of all the classes and subclasses in Destiny. Since Destiny 1, I've always loved Striker. It has the only burst super for Titan as well with Thunder Crash, and Thunder Crash is just such a classic super. Like you basically turn yourself into a TV missile, and you're guiding yourself to wherever your target is, and you're doing crazy damage, and it's just an adrenaline rush every time you activate Thunder Crash, especially when you hit your target dead on. So if you haven't really played Titan all that much, I would suggest if you're going to try out Titan, or you're thinking about making a Titan class, just hop on Arc right away and start messing around with those Thunder Crashes. You can't beat it. So not only that, but Arc Titan now has the best Arc grenades out of all the Arc subclasses, primarily because of the Touch of Thunder aspect, which so Warlocks have like Chaos Accelerant and Touch of Flame for Void and Solar. They got the best grenades there. Revenant Stasis Hunter has Touch of Winter, so they have really good stasis grenades. Well, Titan's got Arc with Touch of Thunder, and yeah, that's a lot of fun. So there's that to experiment with. I'll get more into it. But I just want to kind of get these points out of the way for reasons to use Striker over other subclasses. So as well, I find that Arc Titan has the best mobility out of all the Titan subclasses. Not mobility in the sense of the stat points, but actual movement, mobility, like movement tech. You could argue that Strand Titan has some good potential because they have access to grapple grenades like all the other Strand subclasses, and grapple grenades are very good for movement. But if you're not, if you saw my last video, like I'm using shackle grenades. That's kind of the end game meta. So that's what I like to do on Strand, but on Titan you can actually focus on your movement quite a bit. All the arc subclasses have amplified, so you get kills with arc weapons, arc abilities. You get amplified for 15 seconds or so, and you get that you run faster and reload your weapons faster and all that. So amplified is not Titan specific, but the thruster dodge is, and it's an alternative to using a barricade, and I really enjoy using thruster. It has a fairly quick cooldown, and it's just kind of like a hunter dodge where you can get in and out of combat in bad situations really fast, and it just feels really good to use. The only thing I wish is that it would give you a third-person perspective while you're doing your thruster dodge, kind of like how hunters have third-person perspective on their dodge. But that's just kind of like a little, that's just me. It doesn't really matter though. It still feels great, and it's a lot of fun to use. Also, Striker has some really good melee build potentials, as you'll see in this video. That's what I'm focusing on, but that's because of not just because of the access to certain exotics, but the knockout aspect, which gives you health back when you get melee kills. So it offers some survivability there for melee builds. Also, another reason why I like Striker as opposed to some of the other arc subclasses on Hunter and Warlock is because whereas on the other classes, Spark of Ions is usually kind of a must for one of your fragments. What that does is when you kill jolted targets, you get an ionic trace. Titans don't need to use Spark of Ions, depending on how you're building into it, but you can totally forego Spark of Ions because Touch of Thunder pulse grenades give you ionic traces as they do damage, and there's no kill required. So you get more ionic traces on Titan than you would on other classes without even having Spark of Ions, while the other classes do have to have Spark of Ions. Also, the arc subclasses in general are very good for arc weapon synergy. Like, some builds aren't really, there's not a whole lot you can do for weapon synergy with them aside from using like weapon surges, but that's universal. But I'm talking about actual fragments that would benefit your arc weapons, or that you benefit from using arc weapons with that subclass. So with arc, for example, we've got Spark of Beacons, and there's another Spark of Beacons creates blinding explosions on arc special weapon kills while amplified, which is, I use it a lot, especially on Striker, because you don't have to use a blinding grenade. You can just kill stuff with a waveform grenade launcher, or shotgun is what I'm using in this run, and that'll basically set off a flashbang. There's also another fragment, I can't remember what it's called right now, but if you get arc weapon kills, just any arc weapons, primary, special, heavy, doesn't matter, you'll get ionic traces every now and then from those kills. And I'm going to touch more on Ionic Traces because there's going to be some changes come Season of the Deep, I believe, next season, where Ionic Traces will be even more valuable than they are now. So these are actually important points. But other arc weapons that synergize well with arc, with all arc subclasses. I'm pointing this out because yes, there are elemental specific weapons that are good on all elements, but I think that arc has some of the best heavy weapons in the game, which can all synergize well with the arc subclasses. So let's see, there's Grand Overture, which is the exotic machine gun from Season of the Risen, which basically has the highest burst damage in the entire game for a heavy weapon. That and Parasite. It's just with Grand Overture there's a little more setup required. But yeah, you can two-phase Percy's solo with Grand Overture. It's just an incredible machine gun. It's a little bit tricky to use, but yeah, it offers the highest burst damage in the game. Thunderlord, very meta this season for all precision-based damage on raid bosses, dungeon bosses, etc. Storm Chaser is still the aggressive. It's what I'm using in this run. It's the arc linear from the Duality dungeon, and I can tell you that oftentimes when I join a raid and it's time to do boss damage, if we are doing a precision-based damage type, so say somebody has Divinity and everyone wants to use precision weapons, usually the case is everybody's using Thunderlord. Storm Chaser with Firing Line still outperforms or at least equals the damage output of Thunderlord. So very good. Aggressive frame linears are still top notch. It's just they suffer a little bit more at range, and and they're not as forgiving. So if you miss some of your burst, you won't be doing as much damage as you could with other weapons. But it still definitely has a place, and can get easily on the top of damage. Then we got Hothead, which is also pretty much the meta rocket launcher to be using with any subclass, like even Starfire Protocol Warlocks with their fusion grenades and their Wither Horde. They're still prefer Hothead because it has really good rolls. It is one of the best archetypes for rocket launchers. So yeah, great arc weapons. Now, I want to touch on the Heart of Inmost Light nerf, as well as all the nerfs that Arc Titan got, because if you remember season of Plunder, season 18 was when we got Arc 3.0, and Titans got their Touch of Thunder grenades, and immediately Storm grenades became the meta, and they were used for, I believe, over a season, maybe 2 seasons before they got nerfed. And basically the build was Heart of Inmost Light, and it just gave you insane uptime on your Storm grenades. Like, you can just spam them over and over again. And they were doing more damage from Heart of Inmost Light. So finally, Bungie nerfed Storm grenades slightly. I think they reduced the amount of roaming potential that they had, so you couldn't basically you couldn't just stand behind a wall somewhere and chuck a storm grenade out in the middle of nowhere, and it wouldn't be able to just track all the enemies in the same way that it could before. And I think they reduced the amount of time that it would spend tracking. And then eventually they nerfed the cooldown time from, I think, 2 minute 45 to... Actually, I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think they nerfed the cooldown. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong there. And then they nerfed the thruster dodge cooldown. so that you couldn't basically spam your abilities as fast to proc Heart of Inmost Light to spam your grenades. And then, as if that all wasn't enough, they finally decided to nerf Heart of Inmost Light into the ground. And I'm not being dramatic about it. I think it went from 150% ability regeneration down to 25%, which is a massive nerf. And they reduced the amount of time that you would have in powered abilities. So yeah, so you really you can still use Heart of Inmost Light, but you're not going to be ability spamming the way you were before, and you actually have to kind of strategically plan out when you're going to proc your empowered abilities. Basically, you have to use all 3 of your abilities in quick succession to really get the benefits from Heart of Inmost Light. And I'm just not really all that interested in using Heart of Inmost Light anymore. So we've kind of had to adapt to all these nerfs, and it hasn't been all that hard for me because I've always used pulse grenades anyway. I have used storm grenades, and they definitely have their place, or had their place. But pulse grenades were always slept on. They were never really meta during Season of Plunder and Season of the Seraph. But I always thought they were just slept on, because even though pulse grenades had a longer cooldown than storm grenades, and they didn't roam, if you hit a target with a pulse grenade, it would do more damage than storm grenades, and it would feed you ionic traces the entire time that it was doing damage, and therefore you would get your grenades back faster. So you actually were able to spam more pulse grenades than you were storm grenades. And you don't have to use Spark of Ions, because you automatically get the ionic traces from Touch of Thunder with pulse grenades specifically. So there are other grenades to experiment with too. Touch of Thunder doesn't just benefit storm grenades and pulse grenades. There's flashbang grenades, which I almost used for this mission, but I just decided to go with pulse grenades because I like that burst damage. But pulse grenades, I think they set off 2 flashbang explosions, like 1 on the first bounce and then on impact. But yeah, so I mean, it's not like we're not constricted to just one grenade. We can experiment with other grenades. And then, of course, there's other exotics to use with Striker outside of Heart of Inmost Light. I mean, there are arc-specific exotics like Curus of the Falling Star, and what I'm using in this run, which is the insurmountable Skullfort. Curus has always been a top choice for boss damage in raids and dungeons. You could argue that it kind of suffers at just general gameplay, like if you need to add clear or whatever, but for actual burst damage, you can't really beat Curus of the Falling Star. So I've been using that a lot this season. And then for general gameplay, I've been using Insurmountable Skullfort, just because I thought it would be a fun exotic to play around with. And naturally, when I started coming up with the Skullfort build, I was using Seismic Strike because I think Thunderclap didn't work with Skullfort when Thunderclap came out. So like Season of Plunder, you couldn't use Thunderclap with Skullfort. Now you can. So it's actually really good if you use Thunderclap with it. Thunderclap is more consistent for getting kills, and in order to keep the Skullfort loop going, to benefit from Skullfort, you need to get kills with your melee. If you don't kill the target, then you're not getting a free recharge. Also, Thunderclap basically has a damage dial that you control, so you can just tap charged melee once to get off a quick thunderclap, which is going to do a little bit less damage. That's going to do the least amount of damage that thunderclap can do, but it's still a lot of damage. Like, it'll easily wipe out red bars. And then if you can charge it up for a couple seconds, and you can do even more damage. And I think it has more range too when you charge it up. I don't charge it up very often because I don't like being locked into a charge time. Like, if the target moves, it could be a little bit harder to hit them. So most of the time, I'm just tapping it once to get off a quick thunderclap. But yeah, if you notice like a yellow bar's still got half its health, maybe you want to charge it up a little bit first so you can guarantee yourself the kill. So yeah, Seismic Strike is good, and it's great for movement, but it doesn't often guarantee you a kill, so it can kind of ruin your damage loop. Other things that you can do to ensure that you're keeping your charged melee up if you lose it. Like, if you use it and miss a target or you don't kill them, you'll lose it. So Monte Carlo helps for that. That'll just randomly give you your melee back at times, and kills with Monte Carlo will charge up your melee. You can use 1-2 finisher, which is what I'm using here. So if I have 3 armor charges, I can finish a target and get my melee back, or mostly back. And then there's some weapon perks that you can use to benefit from Thunderclap or any charged melee, such as Trench Barrel, which I'm using on the shotgun here. You use Grave Robber, 1-2 punch on a shotgun, very good. Pugilist isn't bad, but I prefer Trench Barrel or 1-2 punch. Then for combat mods, Impact Induction ×2 is going to give me more pulse grenades from all the melee kills. Hands On is going to charge up my super energy. So you notice I got quite a few Thunder Crashes off in this run. And then the other essentials are Heavy-Handed to get orbs from melee kills. And then just use whatever siphons, surges, and extend your armor charge time with time dilation. And you pick your damage resistance, whatever fits the mission. But anyways, hope you enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Take care.
Great work, everyone. That's what I call